Welcome to Charts Today. My name is David Linton, and today's edition for Friday, the 16th of October, comes to you from London. And we'll look at the energy mix in a minute, but I start really by looking at the bigger picture, the macro, what's going on in markets, looking at currencies, stock market indices, and some commodities bonds before we then look to what's going on in energy. I've got my weekly, my daily, and my 60-minute chart. That's my long-term, medium-term, and short-term view of the market with the corresponding point and figure targets. I'm running on multiple data sources. You can run lots of different sources into Updata. I'm using Refinitiv Icon mostly today, so that's what we'll look at, but you can run it on Bloomberg, Tradeport, whatever you've got. So the key thing is we're basically seeing the dollar has had a pretty good week. This is on the 60-minute chart, so we're seeing 5 days of 60-minute data. Dollar rising off that low that we saw at the beginning of September, and we'll look at that on the weekly chart. That's looking very much like a bottom now. So dollar strength continues. That means, of course, that the euro is weaker against the dollar. We see the trend on the week. We've been lower, and we do look like we're rolling over on that daily chart. So these are the clouds, of course. We're bearish below the cloud, bullish above the cloud. It's really that simple. Looking at sterling, we're back below the 130 mark. Brexit concerns starting to weigh a little bit, and of course renewed lockdowns in Europe from coronavirus is having a bit of an impact as well. And if we look at euro sterling, we see here that sterling has actually just held its head a bit higher this week, and from September again we've just seen that slight appreciation, but longer term sterling has weakened against the euro. Brexit fears really weighing heavily there. Looking at Bitcoin, we're sitting at $11,300, pretty flat this week, but still looking pretty bullish. And looking to stock market indices now, we look at the S&P 500 index. It actually started the day lower yesterday, but actually managed to recover a bit. We see on those hourly candles there. So we're still struggling to make a new daily high, and we were flirting with a weekly closing high as well. If we look at the Nasdaq, much the same as you'd expect. What's really interesting here is we have this bearish engulfing candle that occurred a few weeks back, several weeks back now, and this week is looking a little bit like, if we don't see a big change today, an evening star doji, which is what you get at the end of a run. So uncertainty at the top, meaning that this little run that we've seen may well be over. We've had a good week on the whole, but we've basically started where we're finishing, and that's the idea behind a candlestick doji. So for the moment, uncertainty really reigns. The Dow closed just below flat, and if we look at the futures this morning, we've got the S&P future up 0.01%, so very little change expected there, and the Nasdaq E-mini 0.17. So our call for today in the US is that markets will open flat, but keep an eye on those futures in the run-up to the opening. Market volatility, the VIX volatility, the fear index is rising again. We're back to short-term bullish here. We're at much higher levels than we saw last year, but whilst we're below 30, we can take some heart that the markets are not alarmed. The FTSE future in the UK is up 1.2%. The cash market in Germany is up just over 0.5%. We have fallen into bearish territory here though, and again we've been very flat the last few months, really struggling to make new highs, which is showing up on the weekly chart. We haven't managed to get to new high territory, which the US indices of course have. If you look at the S&P 500 index, it managed to break higher than that March high. We haven't managed to do that in Europe, so that's really quite key. Europe has been subdued by comparison to the US. The US of course been driven heavily by the tech major stocks. Looking at the CAC 40, we're actually up 1.5%, so strong showing in Paris today, but not enough really to take this market back to bullish territory. And really for the last 4 or 5 months we've just been in a sideways range and nowhere near making a new high on the CAC 40 in France. Japan was down just under 1%. The Hang Seng, and that's bearish, the Hang Seng actually was up 1%, but the long-term picture for the Hang Seng is still one of bearishness. The Shanghai Composite actually also just looking a little bit better this week, but on the whole it has been really struggling in a sideways trend there. And India was up just under 1%, so that market still not making new highs, but still looking a little bit better. Oz was down 0.5%, and again nowhere near making new highs. Gold is sitting at 1908, looks spectacular on the long-term chart. The medium-term chart just coming back to to test the cloud. Short term, we're just emerging out of the short-term cloud to bullish. So we are actually still bullish on all three time frames for gold. We've got a new upside target 2% higher. Silver has had a pretty tough week. It's just falling back, really finding cloud support here, but after such a rise this year, no big surprises there. US 10-year yields just steadily falling back. We improved a bit yesterday, but we have actually just seen them falling. What was looking like a bottom in March, we are still just teetering here, and a lot of uncertainty on the bond yield market in the US. Taking a look at the energy mix now, Brent crude has really done nothing this week. We were neutral to clients, and that's really where we are. We started here, we went a bit lower, we went a bit higher. It's been a seesaw. The main thing is on this daily chart, we are falling away, failing to make a new high. The longer we spend here, the more likely we are to see falls. A lower low would be very bad. That's what Charles Dow coined over 100 years ago. The lower low is the real thing to watch for. So if we see Brent crude below $39, that is not good for the market. And on WTI, it's $37, again, flat as you might expect. We've got targets in both directions. So really hard call this week, which is why we went neutral. US nat gas has actually seesawed as well, and we're much where we opened. We were neutral here, primarily because we've seen a lot of volatility in the gas market this week, and it's just really been a hard call. We've felt that RBOB gasoline looked bearish, and we have actually had a bit of a seesaw here this week as well, but just trending lower. Coal is actually struggling on that medium-term chart. This is my daily chart and my 60-minute chart, and right down here for the short term is my 1-minute chart. You really want to be using this on OTC prices, but we see coal really falling away on the short term. Just struggle to break that $61 level, and for the moment we're in bearish mode. Downside target some 8% lower. That's what we're looking to at the moment. If we look at emissions, we're seeing here this break of 25 is really quite critical for emissions, and 26 was the level to watch last week. We broke that. We've now closed yesterday below 25. We see here that we are just actually breaking below, and that is really worrying. So we're seeing emissions lower. Downside targets now. The game of emissions breaking and going higher is off for now. We are heading lower, and that's negating lots of upside targets. So we've seen now that it's all about the downside in emissions. We've got a few upside targets on the 1-minute chart. We will see some relief rallies, but this trend is looking pretty vicious now for emissions. If we look at MBP, we're bullish on gas this week. UK gas just continuing to power ahead, hitting 40 pence per therm for the first time in a very long time. So UK gas is looking very good on the front months. TTF also pushing higher. We're also bullish on gas this week there. And if we look at seasonal gas, we're not quite as clearly bullish, but we're seeing a lot of short-term moves there. Even gas pool just pushing higher, making new highs. So gas markets doing well. It's a different story for power markets. We were bearish on German power this week, and again we're seeing that breakdown of the trend. Really quite worrying there. So we are now heading into bearish territory. Hanging below that psychologically important 40 euros mark is not good for the CAL. And if we look at the quarterly, we're seeing moves away there as well. French power has been the weaker story. We've been bearish on French power for a few weeks now. This is looking pretty bad. And if we look at Dutch power, we actually have recovered a little bit this morning. Not quite as bearish as the German power chart, but it will follow as we'd expect. But we are just starting to see a breakdown. And also Nordic power, which normally does a little bit of different things, we're seeing here is also just starting to pull away. Much more in a sideways trend here, but on the short-term chart, lower. No real downside targets to play for. If we look at the quarterly, we are heading lower here, and we do have downside targets some 1.5–2% lower, and we're breaking down on the daily chart. If we look at Czech power, we're also breaking down here, no surprises. And last of all, UK power, that's actually holding up better than the European market, so we are just seeing a little bit of a trend there. But the big thing for energy markets is to watch this crude oil chart today, and of course where we go with emissions. Can we get back above the 25 level today? But the fact we closed below there yesterday is not good news for carbon. That's it for today. Have a great weekend. Until Monday, happy charting. See you then.